Welcome to Ordo Militaris Radio TV, and we are lifelong Catholics, and what we do is all for free, and for our love of Jesus Christ, and for our Holy Mother, the Church. We will defend our Holy Mother, the Church. Today we're going to be talking about the military orders of old, and what they are, and we welcome Brother Alexis to the program.
Thank you, AJ, for having me back on Ordo Militaris Radio TV. And this is a show which we really should have done a long time ago, because in Ordo Militaris Catholicus, we often encounter people who don't know what we are or what we're doing or why we do it. So always best to begin with a little history. And this has to do with the military orders and how all this came about.
So, what is a military order?
Okay, so first I'm going to talk about a military order according to its nature, and then I'm going to talk about it according to law. A military order is a religious association of Catholics dedicated to the defense of the innocent. And it has a rule which governs its behavior, by which its members attempt to a life of perfection and charity. And the specialty of this religious order is not preaching the faith, but defending the church and defending Christians. And so its discipline that it undertakes is the military arts. And its goal is something practical, a great work of mercy, defending people who cannot defend themselves in times of great necessity. And it's called an order because these associations began in the Middle Ages, when the concept of society was that you would aspire to some stable status in life where you fulfilled your role in the mystical body. And order was the word for that. And the church, prior to the founding of the first military orders, didn't have them. So it was a very novel concept. Now, in canon law, a military order has been recognized and erected by a bishop or the Pope as a religious institute, and they have rules that govern the vows they take and their membership and the ownership of the property and the governance and the election. Although some military orders have been found by kings, and those weren't necessarily a religious order, more like an association or a military unit.
What were their roles in the church?
So the first military orders came into being within the first generation after the Crusaders took Jerusalem on July 15th, 1099. And many noblemen, especially Knights Banneret, that was a knight who had the legal right to acquire territory and possessions and govern it in his own name, came to the Holy Land and participated in that crusade, and afterwards joined the Kingdom of Jerusalem or the Principality of Antioch or the County of Tripoli. Those are the three Crusader states, and participated in the life and the military defense and the governance of those states. But many of these knights were not as wealthy as the others and did not have enough men-at-arms following them around so that they could acquire territory. And they ended up staying in Jerusalem in various hospices of the city, which were something between a hospital and a hotel or a hostel, like we call today. And these men gathered together in religious associations, first for the defense of particular parts of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, either giving safe passage to pilgrims landing on the coast on the way to the city of Jerusalem, or defending the Holy Sepulchre, or defending the city, and or defending the Temple Mount. And that was their three roles, and that's how we have the three most famous ones are named like that. So the order to defend the Holy Sepulchre is called the Knights of the Holy Sepulchre, and they still exist, a recognized religious order. The order that defended the Temple Mount was called the Military Order of the Knights Templar, and the military order that defended the pilgrims on their way from the coast to Jerusalem was called the Knight Hospitaliers, which today are known more commonly by their modern name, the Knights of Malta.
Yep.
Okay, so now that I named them, probably everyone in the audience is ears puckered up when I mentioned one of these names, which has become rather legendary or notorious or mysterious, and that's the Knights Templar. So, AJ, maybe you can tell us something about the history of Knight Templar to dispel these myths.
Yeah. So first, going to tell you about their founding. You get on the right book here. Yep, right. Okay. And I want to thank Brother Alexis's brother John to help me prepare for this. He found me all these books, actual Catholic books on these guys. There's so much fake stuff out there. It's hard. So the origins of the Knights Templar. Year was 1099. The Crusaders had recaptured Jerusalem and the holy places in Palestine, which had fallen into the Muslims for 400 years earlier, and which much more recently have been subjugated by the Seljuk Turks. The Turks' invasion of Asia Minor had been like a tidal wave, and their victory over the army of the uh, Byzantine Empire had been a major catastrophe for the latter. The comings and goings of pilgrims had never been completely interrupted, except at the time of particularly cruel persecutions of Christians, such as in the reign of the Caliph Hakim at the beginning of the 11th century. Pilgrimages would be given a considerable impulse from this reconquest of the holy places, but a pilgrimage could still be undertaken only at considerable risk, because the majority of the crusading lords, once they had fulfilled their vows, returned to Europe. The forces remaining in the Holy Land were derisory only in a few fortified cities, or in the castles hastily constructed or rebuilt at sensitive points in the kingdom would they gain in strength. Thieves and brigands infested the highways. Ambushing pilgrims, they stripped a good number of them of all they had and massacred many. Being aware of the situation, a few knights decided to extend their vows and devote their lives to defense of pilgrims. They gathered around one knight, Hugh, who came from Payons in Champagne, and his companion Geoffrey of Saint Omer. Fairly quickly, some prominent lords joined the project, which came into being in 1118, or more probably 1119. Among the first 12 members was Andrew of Montbard, uncle of Bernard the Abbot of Clairvaux. In 1130, folk of Anjou would join them. And a little while later, certainly before the 1125, Hugh, the Count of Champagne. These knights pledged themselves to defend pilgrims and protect the roads that led to Jerusalem. They were devoting their lives to this and decided to take a vow to the effect, which they pronounced before the Patriarch of Jerusalem. So King Baldwin II let them have a room in his palace on the temple esplanade, whilst the canons of the holy city made over them a piece of land next to their own. All that happened in the first year of their existence, 1119 to 1120. A few years later, the king of Jerusalem moved into the Tower of David and left to the poor knights of Christ, that is, what they called themselves, that first royal residence, which people identified with Solomon's temple, and which the Muslims had turned into the Al-Aqsa Mosque. From that time on, the new order would be the Order of the Temple, and its members, the Templars.
So, for the audience who doesn't know why AJ was cheering Polka Banquetain, this is one of his blood relatives. So, just a small side note. People often say about Ordo Militaris, well, what do you have to do with the Crusades? Well, I think that explains it. So, uh, these stories we hear about the Templars, are they true or false?
About them being satanic, worshiping the devil, and all that other crazy nonsense. That's false. This this amazing author, he wrote this book on the Knights Templar. Uh, she, it's she goes through this an amazing in the forward of this book. Uh, it's a little long, but let me read a little bit from the forward, where she just knocks them down one at a time, one after the other, defending the knights. The historical distortions are difficult to straighten out. A mistake about the chemical compound or the airline schedule will be exposed in due course by the explosion or misconnection. But misconceptions about the past can persist for centuries. Despite the diligent work of historians, either because vested interest benefit from the distortions, the Whig view of history, or because the fanciful version is more fun. This is particularly true of the Knights of the Temple of Solomon, the Templars. The order was founded at the start in the 12th century by a knight from Champagne in eastern France, Hugh of Payens, who, 5 years after the capture of Jerusalem by the First Crusade, made a pilgrimage in the Holy Land with his liege lord and namesake, Count Hugh of Champagne. Seeing the need for knights to protect the pilgrims from Muslim marauders, but also sensing a call from God to lead a life of a monk, Hugh and 8 companions formed a hybrid community of monk knights. They took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, and followed the rule of a religious order, but remained under arms. Not all the leaders of the church at this time approved of this notion of a military order. Saint Bruno, the founder of the Carthusians, had grave doubts about the moral legitimacy of killing for Christ. However, Hugh of Pain found a champion in the leading churchman of the time, Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, who not only endorsed the concept, but drew up a strict rule much like that of his own Cistercian order, which was approved by the Pope. It was an idea whose time had come. The rulers of Latin Christendom all wished to go on crusade, but ran the risk of usurpation if they left their kingdoms for any length of time. The Templars became the proxies, endowments of land provided income, with which the order could equip knights, sergeants, and squires, build castles, and hire mercenaries. Their monastic vows of obedience led to a military discipline impossible to impose on prima donna knights. There was no time limit to their period of service, as there was a feudal levy. As celibates, they had no children to provide for, and the authority within the order did not depend upon feudal ties. The chief of the Syrian assassins, Sinan ibn Salman, said that there was no point in killing a Templar Grand Master, because there would always be another knight to take his place. By the, by the beginning of the 13th century, the Templar had become a rich and powerful institution with fortresses in London and Paris, a network of well-run land holdings throughout Europe, and a strong military and political presence in the Holy Land. There is almost no evidence of corrupt knights, certainly less than there is of corrupt monks. But there is some of the certain institutional arrogance, conspicuous consumption. The Templar fortress in Acre was adorned with 4 golden plate lions, costing 1,500 Saracen besants. Answerable only to the Pope, bishops resented their autonomy and the kings their wealth. In 1307, King Philip of France, looking for ways to make up a despot in the royal finances, decided to expropriate the property of the Templars, accusing the order of treachery, blasphemy, sodomy, and devil worship. He ordered arrests of all the knights in the jurisdiction, and called upon the kings of England and Aragon to do the same. The subsequent torture and trial of the Templars and the procrastination of then Pope Clement V and the dissolution of the order at the Council of Vienna in 1311, and one of the most shameful episodes in the history of the medieval church. As disgraceful as the fate of the last Templars, the last Grand Master, James de Molay, was burned at the stake in Paris, has been the appropriation of the order by myth-making Freemasons in the 18th century, whose mystagogy and obfuscation persists to this day. From Walter Scott's Ivanhoe to Dan Brown's the Da Vinci Code, the portrayal of the Templars is as false as it is absurd. The distortion expressed and even enraged the French historian Regine Perraud, who had always set right many of the misapprehensions about the Middle Ages in her Those Terrible Middle Ages, debunking the myths. Now in the Templars, the rehabilitates the devout Catholic knights, exposing the incredible crop of fanciful allegations attributing to the Templars every kind of esoteric rite and belief, from the most ancient to the most vulgar. As she rightly points out, the truth is accessible in archives and libraries. It is not impossible to uncover the facts. The result is an excellent, unadorned history which is a pleasure to read.
And yeah, let the audience know what the title of this book is and the author, so maybe they can find it in the library.
Yeah, The Templars, Knights of Christ by Regine Perron, Pronounced. I got the online version, a link to the archive.org deal that you can rent free to read. And also got it linked to the Amazon page where you can purchase a copy.
Okay, so one of the this is a book that dispels the myth. And the Masons have made the Templars into kind of like an iconic symbol of themselves. They even have Masonic levels of membership called Templar, because they are a satanic a group of sodomites and pedophiles. And so they believe the lies the French king invented and to steal all their money. And the same French king had his bullies beat up the Pope and kill the Pope some years before. So the current Pope, Clement V, in 1305, was just terrified of the King of France. And he committed one of the worst and horrible crimes committed by the Pope against any religious order by dissolving them and allowing them to be tortured and put to death on false charges. But that apart, the Templars had a great reputation for military excellence. They were very devout and very upright, and they were a religious order. And this is hard to understand for us today because we live in a Masonic age in which military men are taught that paganism makes them a good warrior. And so almost everyone has forgotten that no, it's Christian virtue that makes a good warrior. Chastity, the fact that a man does not have sex with men or women or with anything or with himself, that strengthens a man's character and directs him towards God. Poverty, that he doesn't seek to make wealth for himself, but to use everything for the cause of Christ. And obedience, that he obeys his military superiors for the love of Christ and not just for personal gain, honor, or vainglory. And this is, if you don't understand those values, you will never understand the military orders or the Templars. And this is what makes them mysterious to modern men who are pagans and have just sucked up the whole Masonic culture. They can't imagine that anyone is living Christianity at that level, especially after the Reformation. They'll say it's extremist. The Templars certainly would be called an extremist Christian militia, and they were none of those words except Christian. And
Yep. So the next one we mentioned before was the Knights Hospitaliers, and again we found it. I helped found this, but when I was setting up the show, I was also shared this link to this another book that you can read online for free at archive.org, and it's linked in the show page. And here's the introduction of that book on how they were founded. As Europe emerged from the turmoil brought about by the dismemberment of the Roman Empire and began to require consistency as an assemblage of states united by the bond of a common Christian faith, the Holy Land with all its associations exercised a powerful attraction on the nations of the West. Pilgrims in ever-increasing number undertook an arduous journey and faced the dangers by sea and land which it entailed to visit the tomb of Christ and the places hallowed by his life and in passion. The growing movement, and even more the wave of Christian enthusiasm, which in the 11th century culminated in the Crusades, called for an organization of some sort which should provide shelter and hospitality suitable to the, well, that's a big word, exigencies of those times.
the necessities.
A small company of knights resolved in a spirit of Christian charity to supply this want. They formed themselves into a brotherhood afterward known by the name of the Knights Hospitaliers, with the object of protecting the poor, the infirm, and the stricken. They selected a chief or master of their own, who appropriately bore the name of Custodian of the Poor of Christ of the Hospital of Jerusalem. The Crusades were the inevitable outcome of the feelings which stirred the heart of Europe during the whole century. The Hospitaliers were a necessary corollary of the impulse which led Christians to the Holy Land and pilgrimage to the tomb of Christ, which made Christian soldiers flock thereto its rescue. It became the duty of the Hospitaliers to ensure the safety of their hospital by providing for its defense. Then the institutes of the beneficence established in the new kingdom of Jerusalem, and the safety of the pilgrims in the region surrounded and frequently infested by hostile hordes absolutely required a permanent discipline in the troops mustered by the vassals and dependents of that kingdom. Baldwin I, King of Jerusalem, therefore gladly recognized and confirmed the brotherhood of the Hospitaliers. This was in 1104. Pascal II sanctioned the constitution of the Hospitaliers by a bull in 1113. The original bull is still to be seen in the palace of the Grand Masters in Valletta. The followers of the saintly Gerard, the first master, and Raymond de Poux took for their ensign the white cross on the red ground, their badge and inspiration in bringing peace and consolation amidst the din of battle, the white cross of peace in the blood-stained field of war. With the exception of this symbolic cross, the members had no special uniform. They wore a national costume of their respective country, of the class or rank to which they belonged in the brotherhood. The plain white cross in course of time changed its shape to the eight-pointed cross. The coat of arms worn over the armor and distinguishing, according to then prevalent customs, the combatant knights, was the white cross with gules, Gules.
Oh, I don't know, Luzon. It's a French term in heraldry. Yeah.
It was a sort of red shirt or silk or wool with short sleeves, with a white vertical and horizontal band forming a cross on the breast and on the back. So that is how they were founded.
Okay, so my first comments need to be slightly modified about what they did. And then there's many other orders that came to existence subsequently, both in the Holy Land and in Spain and in Germany and throughout Europe. But these were the two principal ones.
Yep. So why did we decide to found our PMC according to the military orders of old?
So Ordo Militaris Catholicus began with an inspiration on August 1st, 2016, about 7 days after Father Jacques Hamel had his throat slit and he was stabbed to death at Mass in his parish church in Normandy, France. And he was a veteran of the French army. And the inspiration was to do what our Lord would obviously be telling us to do if we were threatened and persecuted. Knock and you shall receive, seek and you shall find. And we can only have the security with benefactors who can finance it and military men who are going to execute it. And Ordo Militaris Catholicus is an organization that sought those two things. And shortly after getting to know AJ on social media, we decided we weren't just going to talk about it, we were going to do something about it. So by the 28th of that same month, we founded Ordo Militaris Inc., a private military corporation in Cheyenne, Wyoming, which in the next year moved to Montana because the laws are a bit more favorable. And we founded it as a private military corporation because in US law, that's the kind of corporation that can help persecuted Christians, either through humanitarian works or directly supporting or training military men or military units, according to the laws of the United States or other nations, to defend Christians. So it's a very practical reason. It's not anything new. I think everyone in Christendom realizes now we need a military force defending us. There's no country that will defend Catholics. For example, the United States went into Iraq in the second Iraqi war, and its goal was to defend civilians in general, not Christians in particular. And what happened was 1 million Christians disappeared. They were either genocided or forced to flee because once America took control of the country, they were persecuted by Muslims, and the United States did nothing about it. The United States actually armed and excused the persecutors, and they still do that. And Christians could not be driven from the Mideast because France has done nothing to protect the Christians of Lebanon or Syria. This is an effect of the modern Masonic state, which is persecuting Christians in its own countries. It's certainly not going to admit persecuting Christians directly or indirectly, or allowing them to be persecuted in other countries. So the time has come for Catholics again to found military orders, and that was the realization. That was the inspiration AJ and I had in August to found Ordo Militaris and the corporation that bears that name.
Yeah. This is from our recent experience. What do military veterans need to know about what we are and what we are not?
Okay, so since the founding of Ordo Militaris Incorporated in Montana, and I mean in Wyoming in 2016, I've been its president. And though as a friar, I wish I could pass on the duties to others, I stay on until we can recruit the military men to do this work. And our proposal is something that only devout Christians, devout Catholics could understand. And the difficulty military men have is that all of you, every last one of you who has been trained in the military by a secular government has been given a vision of military life which has nothing to do with history and nothing to do with Christianity, but it's based on Masonic propaganda that says to you that even pagans could be warriors, even Satanists. And it doesn't matter that you keep yourself chaste or whether you lie with women or lie with boys or babies, as long as you don't violate a law if there's a law in the area. And that all you need to win the battle is military expertise. Morale isn't even very important. And the whole concept of virtue has been perverted. So you have taught to have no self-control, addicted to drugs and sex and liquor. And worst of all, pride. The pride that thinks without God it can achieve something. And this is because modern militaries are tools of Masonic states and maintain their control and persecution of Christians. So it's very difficult for the modern military man to understand our order unless he has red-pilled himself to an extreme degree, because it's not enough to admire what Catholic Crusaders did in the Middle Ages. It's not enough to admire what the Templars or the Hospitallers or the Knights of Malta achieved or the battles they fought. What is necessary is an internal transformation where you live no longer for yourself, but for Jesus Christ, in which you don't seek any more a career or wealth or power or money or sex or vainglory or pride or power, that you serve only the cause of the Most Holy Trinity, and that is the reign of God on earth, and that you detach yourself from loyalties to nations, political movements, your own family, your culture, and even your language. And yet, with all that, you still dedicate yourself to military professionalism and military excellence and military ethics. And this is the absolute opposite of modern military craft. Because modern military craft is military professionalism for the servant of Satan, or the servant of the flesh, or the servant of the world. Whereas the Catholic military orders is military craft wedded to the cause of Christ, the Catholic faith, and the works of mercy. And this is why our religious motivation is not fanaticism, because it is strongly wed to the moral law, much more than any military in existence. And it is not a militia, because we're not about defending a particular part of land. We're about defending Christians. It would be different if a military owned territory, some military orders own territory, like the Knights of Malta. They actually have a castle in Valletta, Malta, and I think they've leased an island or two from the nation of Malta just so they can have territory. And they're recognized, I think, by 120 nations as a sovereign state. But it's about defending Christians. And this is something that modern military men is not trained to do or even want to do. And you're not even allowed to think it. For, as I mentioned before, another show, I once wanted to put an ad about our order in a military magazine run by the US government. And it was refused on the grounds they said we were discriminatory. We were discriminatory because, according to the editor, we defended only Christians, and therefore we were prejudiced. And so that was the excuse he used to discriminate against us and prevent us from putting an ad. And that's the way the Masons work. They are liars on principle. Their first hatred is Christ, and they would never tolerate Catholics taking up arms to defend themselves. That is the worst thing they can possibly imagine in their worst nightmare. And so we are their worst nightmare. And so it's very difficult for military men to understand this. Most of them freak out. I'll tell you, once they understand what we're really about, their knees get wobbly, their speech gets confused, and they run away. They do. And I've seen it happen in person. And so if you're a military man that's not afraid to put his foot in church, if he's a military man who thinks saying, 12 Our Fathers a day is not an act of extremism, and if you're a military man who is first a citizen of the kingdom of Christ and realizes that any national loyalty to blood family, though it might be legitimate, is much less of value. And then, of course, you have to be a military man who wants to get to heaven and serve in the kingdom of heaven and sees this world as passing as only a battleground for proving yourself. And finally, you need to be a man of great magnanimity. It's a word that Masons won't teach us anymore. Magnanimity means big-heartedness, big soulness, having a big soul, which means you seek the greatest things because they're great. And you despise petty and mediocre quests. And above all, you seek humility and you despise vanity. And that outlook on life doesn't make you a bad warrior. That will make you the best warrior, because it puts you in absolute contact with reality as it is, without any ideologic or worldly or political mask over it. So we are not an order dedicated to promoting democracy or promoting human liberty in the Masonic concepts of those things. We're about defending Christians so they have the freedom to worship Jesus Christ in peace and in tranquility. And if they've lost that, to restore that. And to restore that, not only defending their persons, but defending their property. So it is, we are something that is unheard of in modern times, and completely unique. There is no organization like ours. We are not an honorary order where you become a member and you get to wear a cloak and heraldic devices and prance around in parades and eat at banquets and pretend to be someone in the Middle Ages or pretend to be noble. Okay, we're not about that. We're about men and women who aspire to do great things for Jesus Christ by serving those who are in the greatest necessity.
Yeah. How has the restoration of the military order in Ordo Militaris Catholicus been received by Catholics today?
Okay, so the best of the best, the one who have this spirit, the one who were given this grace and confirmation by the Holy Ghost, they think it's absolutely wonderful what we're doing. And they are among our great supporters, the ones who know of us existing. But since most Catholics aren't living their faith, and most believe that being Catholic is just name only, and I can live as a pagan, I can live as a socialist, I can live as a capitalist, I can live as a racist, I can live as a Marxist, I can live as a fascist, they find what we're doing abhorrent to any one of those prejudices or attachments. Because just as some people find it incomprehensible that someone would become a Franciscan friar and want to keep his, and they call that evil. So what we're doing is considered even more evil, that you would encourage young men to give up career, family, wealth, nation, and risk themselves, or they'll say, throwing themselves into battle like cannon fodder. They'll say something nasty like that. Because they don't believe Jesus Christ is God, and they don't really believe it. They might say it at Sunday, because they really want to be in their parish just for social reasons. But actually risk your life in the service of Jesus Christ. They wouldn't help a poor man if he was starving right in front of his house. They wouldn't even do that. They'll find some excuse and walk on the other side of the street, as in the parable, our Lord said. And an interesting thing about the parable of the Samaritan is the man in it got beaten up because he was traveling on the road to Arabia, to a dangerous land full of risks and insecurities. And so The military orders are not founded by men, they're founded by the Holy Ghost. And they are putting into practice the parable of the Good Samaritan that Christ taught and Christ indicated in his words. And if you are a Catholic that puts Christ first in your life, especially in how you think and in governing how you desire, you see that what we're doing is wonderful. But if you don't, you'll find us much to your disliking. And so Catholics, especially who have wedded themselves to the political agendas of modern times, Masonic and godless states, they are some of our chief opponents because they believe they must destroy us. As long as we exist, they are reminded daily of their hypocrisy. And so this is something we've learned in the last 5.5 years and come to endure. But the cross is the sign of our order. And so we have to be willing to wear that like Christ wore the cross. Christ didn't die on the cross with 10,000 people around him clapping and applauding him. He only had one man at the foot of his cross. The rest denied him or fled from him. So our order is an order for very unique Catholics, very unique and courageous and brave and generous. We're an order for the best of the best, not for the mediocre, not for the greedy, not for the licentious, not for drunkards, not for careerists, not for braggarts, not for pretenders, not for megalomaniacs, not for neurotics, not for cowards. And the phrase "be all you can be" is just Masonic propaganda, except in our order, where you can be all that Christ wants of you, and you can shine like the sun in the kingdom of God the Father if you achieve the ideal of our order, which is expressed in our motto: greater love no man has than to lay down his life for his friends. That is, to risk your life for fellow Christians.
So, how have the regional military orders today received Ordo Militaris in the recent days or weeks?
So there are some military orders existing today, but there is one big difference. There are several big differences between them and us. The military orders that we have spoken about in this program, the ones that still exist, which are the Knights of Malta and the Knights of the Holy Sepulchre, they are associations for noblemen. Okay, so you have to have 4 grandparents who are noblemen to be actually members of the religious order. If you don't, you could be associate members of some way. So our order differs because you don't have to be noble or of noble blood to join. I am of absolute peasant blood. About the only nobility I can claim is that blood-wise, one of my ancestors was a original citizen of the Republic of Venice, which is not a noble status. AJ is related to like nearly all the nobility of Europe, so you know, so I'm like dirt and he's like gold. But this is a good. When I found out AJ was related to Charlemagne, I said, well, this is the perfect combination for founders of the order. We have a layman, we have a religious, we have an absolute peasant. And my grandfather's actually a bastard, and we have someone of noble lineage that can trace all the way back to the founders, even the founders of these military orders and the patrons that oversaw them throughout the ages. So this is something, therefore, is somewhat new in the church, and people criticize us. They go, "You can't found a military order." So where's it written that we can't found a military order? And the noblemen of these big orders like, oh, only kings can found military orders. Well, the minute before the king signed the script establishing it, there was already, guys out there doing it. So if you're going to play the games with the word found because you just want to throw mud on us because, what we are makes you realize that you're not what you claim to be, then you can claim that when we say found, we mean the legal sense of a monarchical institution by a legal act. That's not what we mean. We mean start. Okay. And I think we will one day be a religious military order, because I think we have a couple dozen saints and monarchs of Europe who are going to root for us because their great grandson or nephew is one of our co-founders. So the other orders really don't pay us much attention. Sometimes they're friendly on social media because they see our cross is like their cross, although ours is different, because the Templars and the Knights of Malta, their chevrons that form their four cross touch only at one point, where ours overlap. And that's to signify that we are united together as one. We are not an exclusive order of nobility. And our cross is blue because we are consecrated to Our Lady for the sake of protection. And the colors of Our Lady are, her sash is blue and her habit is white, the Immaculate Conception. So we are an order dedicated in the service of Christ to his mother. And that doesn't make us any less military, but it does require of us and of a holiness of life that will perhaps is a higher standard than the other orders, and gives us an example of holiness that we should always keep in mind.
Finally, how do you see the order today in regards when the Knights Templars started to get men in everything they needed?
So as you hear from the history that AJ recounted for us, the military order started in a war zone, in a foreign land, and where people were being persecuted. So I think the Ordo Militaris today, with its commandery in Kiev, from where I'm standing right now, is following in the footsteps of those great and saintly knights, because we're in a war zone and we're here to help persecuted Christians, whether through humanitarian works such as feeding, clothing, and housing the poor and the needy, or through assisting military men any way we can. And unlike the knights of old, we have access to means of communication to reach the whole world. And we don't have rich benefactors behind us or even politicians behind us. But that's not necessary enough to have Christ and Our Lady and the saints of heaven behind us. And with your help and with your participation in the order, we can do that. And so we have an order that is unique, in which any way you can and you can participate. If you just want to do a small contribution, we have different levels of pledging as a membership in the order. And we grant those pledgers an honorary dignity in the order. If you want to serve as a volunteer, there are different ways of volunteering. Simply just sharing our social media publicity. Many people say, there's nothing I can do. Well, share that video 100 times today. Share that post on Twitter. Share that post on Facebook. There's always something you can do, even from home, that doesn't cost you any money. And this is perhaps our biggest, if we need volunteers to do something, that's it. Because for 5.5 years, AJ and I have done a lot. But 2 people can't do everything in publicity, and military expenses are expensive. And what needs to be done to create an order and to create a place where men can hear the call and receive training, and we are not there yet. We do need a training camp where men can join the order, go through training, take their vows, and live a religious military life. That is our ideal, has always been our ideal. And we don't care how many people out there mock us for it. You can go fly a kite, because we know that this is the will of God and the Holy Spirit has our back. So just like in the ancient times, these orders began very slowly and took decades and generations and centuries to grow. We're under no illusion that we're going to grow overnight, or that someone's going to drop 100 million in our lap and allow us to do what we do. No, we have to prove ourselves, and it's a testing. And this is part of the military discipline too, that you don't live in illusions. But you hit the road and you get dirty, and you pay the mileage in sweat and in contradiction. And so our Lord keeps helping us, and every year we get more support, and it gives us more ideas of how to promote the order one way or another. And so I'm confident that we shall have success. Maybe it won't be in our lifetimes, but we continue on the path nevertheless. But I would end this program with an appeal to men who want to be in the military and realize the militaries of the world are just so corrupt and godless they would lose their soul. Don't give up your desire to be military. Ask Christ for a vocation in Ordo Militaris to dedicate your life to a life of holiness and military service. Because we intend to be a fraternity of warriors, of Christian warriors, of Catholic warriors. And we now have 3 commanderies in Europe, so the doors are open if the grace of God comes, and to an individual. But it's an entirely different form of life. And I think tomorrow we're going to do a program on our rule, because we do have a rule, and we'll go point by point through it and show how wonderful it is and yet how easy it is to keep. So stay tuned, as they say.
Yeah. And I just want to change up on my Twitter a little bit just to see if I get any different reaction. So you'll see on my new banner the image of the coat of arms of my 2 uncles, King Baldwin the First of Jerusalem and Godfrey of Bouillon's shield on my so. And also, I want to thank you all for those who first got the first set of Lepanto flags. We're out right now, but more are coming. Anything else?
Yeah, just be patient. The flags, we ordered a second 50. This is a small way we raise funds. And I'm really glad we do raise so many funds through the Lepanto flag. I would just ask those who just find it so beautiful and hang it on the wall and admire the valor of the Catholics who defended Europe at the Battle of Lepanto, to ask yourself, is that the sum of your desires merely to admire a flag? And Ordo Militaris is not a flag or a reality of heroism. And this is something far greater. So thank you for buying the flag. But yeah, you young men out there, think of something great. Think of doing something great for your life and not wasting it in the mediocrity of this world.
Yep. So stay tuned for tomorrow, where we read the Holy Rule of Ordo Militaris. And please like and share this video. It'll be on BitChute, YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey, all those places. So until tomorrow, day is full.
Day is full.